Alright, YouTubers, welcome back to the Final Call Racing channel. Today I'm going to put the oil pan on, a couple other things, show you a couple of problems I think I'm going to run into on this engine going into the S10. First I want to get the oil pan on, show you kind of how I pre-lube the engine. I got the front cover on, as you can see. There's absolutely nothing special about putting it on. It's basically the same thing as doing the rear cover on this thing. Torque it down to spec. Next thing we're going to do is try and get a little bit of oil going through the motor, and then we'll drop the oil pan on and finish priming it. First thing I like to do on all my cars before I do oil changes is I like to load the oil filter up with oil. That way it doesn't start for very long. Oil filter already full, so it doesn't take any time at all for the rest of the engine to build oil pressure. The next thing I like to do on a new engine is pour oil down the pickup tube and then rotate the motor over a little bit, get the oil pump good and primed, and then I'll go ahead and drop the pan on, put a little bit more oil in it, and rotate the motor over. Alright, if you can see there, oil is up to the top of the pickup tube full. So there's probably a little bit of air in there. So what I need to do now is rotate the motor over. Alright, motor on pretty much all Chevrolets, big block, small block, LS, is clockwise. So I'm just breaking her over here, and you can see it starts sucking the oil down that pickup tube. And then it should go to the oil filter next. I'm going to keep priming that until I get oil starting to come up out of one of these holes. Alright, after filling that tube about 2 to 3 times, you can see I have oil just starting to come up where the oil filter goes. So now it's time to go ahead and put the pan on. Alright, before you drop the oil pan on, it's important on the front and rear covers where they meet and the gasket goes between to put some sealer, silicone sealer. So I've done that. Now it's okay to drop the pan on. Alright, I went ahead and installed the oil filter. It was already primed. Now I'm going to pour just a few quarts in here. I don't have my dipstick tube in yet. Just enough for the oil pump to pick up. Alright, I've been dumping a little bit of oil in here, cranking her over. You can see there's oil been flowing through there where that's where the oil pressure hole is. So I know it's getting up close to the top. If I had an electric starter on here, I could probably get it to come out the top, but I'm not worried. I'll drench the valve train in oil next, right before we put the valve covers on. Alright, when you get your Holley valve covers, which by the way look very nice in my opinion, especially when you find them in a swap meet for $100 brand new. But you have to get fasteners with them. You can use the stock ones, which why would you use stock valve cover bolts on a polished valve cover? So I went ahead and bought some ARP bolts, 12 headed bolts, 12 point headed bolts, 400-7530, and then you have to buy the valve cover grommets, which don't come with the valve covers or the bolts, and you have to put GM valve cover gaskets on. So I'm going to dump some oil in this thing and get ready to slap the valve cover on. I just like to drizzle everything just a little bit in oil so you know it's not going to be dry. Alright, there she is all dressed up with the valve covers on it. I'm still waiting for I ordered some Allen bolts for those. And again, I don't know why Holley doesn't include the bolts with it. It'd be so much nicer. The gaskets were a little bit of a pain to get on. The valve covers, the groove in the valve cover, you had to really work the gasket to get it in the groove. And then when you started tightening it up, it wanted to push the gasket out if you didn't have it fully seated in the valve cover, so I kind of had to use a pick and push it in as I tighten it down, but once it tightened down it seemed to be alright. Got my coolant temp sensor in, got my plug on this side of the head. I'm still waiting for LS1 crank sensor. I need to get that. I need to torque those down and put my balancer on. And the balancer uses a crank spacer. I'll show you that. For the LS7 crankshaft, to use a standard Corvette style balancer, non-dry sump, you have to use this spacer. It'll sit right there when you tighten the bolt down. That way you don't have to cut the end of the crank off, otherwise you have to cut the end of the crank off that much. So that spacer will take up the extra room. And one other problem I'm going to have is my oil pressure sensor. Okay, the problem with the oil pressure sensor is I have to use this one wire style for my PCM. And as you can see, it hits the intake. So I need to measure it, and I'm going to mill down this bung right here, and I also bought a tap. It's a 16 by 1.5 tap that those take, so I'm going to cut that off where I need to and tap it down the rest of the way. It'll probably be about flush when I get it in there. So that's what I'm going to have to do next, is get that in there. The last problem I think I'm going to have is not enough vacuum for my brakes. I have that small vacuum port manifold that I'm going to use for my idle air control, and I had a bung coming off of it, but I also want to run a PCV system, so I think I'm going to use the bung off of that for the PCV. And this here is a Volvo vacuum pump. I went to the junkyard today and got this for $14. It seems to have pretty good suction on it. I'm going to take it to work tomorrow and put a vacuum gauge on it. We'll see how much vacuum it pulls, and then I'm going to put it in line with the vacuum reservoir with the switch to turn it on and off under so many inches of vacuum. I found a switch online, but I want to see how much this pulls first before I order a switch. But that should solve any brake issues I have, and also I'll use it for the HVAC has to have one vacuum line hooked up to it. So it's a pretty compact unit, as you can see. The hands, it's pretty small. Chevrolet makes one for Equinox, but the junkyard I went to didn't have any, so I did some more research, found out Volvo had almost identical pump that the GM uses. So I'm going to try this.